After years of saving, I finally purchased my dream home, a charming craftsman with mature trees, and a spacious yard backing up to a wooded area in the prestigious Oak Ridge Heights subdivision. The property featured a narrow dirt trail running along the eastern edge, which the listing agent described as private nature access. I envisioned peaceful morning walks with my coffee, surrounded by birds and dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. The first weekend in my new home was spent unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. I noticed occasional movement through my kitchen window, people walking dogs or jogging along the trail. It seemed harmless enough, though I found it odd that strangers were so close to my back windows. By Monday afternoon, I counted 17 different people using the path. Some walked purposefully, as if commuting, while others lingered with children or pets. On Tuesday morning, I ventured outside to inspect the trail more closely. The path was wider than it appeared in the listing photos, with obvious signs of regular use. Empty dog waste bags hung from tree branches. Discarded water bottles dotted the edges. I frowned at the realization that my private sanctuary was being treated like a public thoroughfare. I pulled out my property documents that evening, spreading them across my dining table. According to the deed and plot map, the trail fell entirely within my property lines. There was no easement or right-of-way marked. This was unequivocally my land, not a community path. I made notes to contact the previous owner for clarification. Wednesday afternoon, I was planting flowers near the trail when a middle-aged woman with highlighted blonde hair styled in an angled bob approached, walking a small, yapping poodle. She wore expensive athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. The dog veered toward my newly planted flowers. "Excuse me," I called politely. "Could you please keep your dog on the path? I just planted those." The woman stopped, lowered her sunglasses, and looked at me with unmistakable disdain. "This path has always been for everyone. Are you the new owner?" Her tone carried a note of accusation. "Yes, I am. And according to my property documents, this trail is actually on my private property," I explained calmly. Her expression hardened. "Well, everyone in Oak Ridge Heights uses this trail. It has been a community path for 20 years. She tugged her dog's leash and continued walking, deliberately letting the animal step on my flower bed. Friday morning, I found a handwritten note taped to my mailbox. "Community access paths cannot be restricted. Please respect neighborhood traditions." No signature, no contact information, just a passive-aggressive demand. Over the weekend, I decided to stand near the trail entrance and politely inform users about the property line. Some people apologized and seemed genuinely surprised. Others rolled their eyes or muttered under their breath as they continued walking. One elderly man laughed outright. "Good luck with that, son. People around here do not change their walking routes for anybody." By Sunday evening, tension had replaced my initial excitement about the home. I found another note, this one slipped under my front door. "New residents should adapt to community norms, not disrupt them. The trail access benefits everyone." Again, unsigned. I stood at my back window, watching a young couple with a stroller cut through my yard, veering off the trail to take a shortcut. They glanced toward my house, saw me watching, and hurried along without changing course. In that moment, I realized this was not just about a path. This was about respect, boundaries, and my right to enjoy the property I had worked so hard to purchase. Monday morning, I called the real estate office that handled my purchase and requested contact information for the previous owner. The agent hesitated but eventually provided an email address for Robert Williams, who had owned the house for nearly 15 years before relocating to Arizona. I composed a polite message explaining the situation and asking about the trail's history. Robert responded that same evening. His message was apologetic but revealing. When I first moved in, only a few immediate neighbors would occasionally cross that corner of the property to reach the community park. Over time, more people began using it, and it just seemed easier to allow it than cause neighborhood friction. There is no legal easement or agreement, just informal permission I granted over the years. Honestly, it became a source of frustration, especially when people began bringing dogs and leaving waste behind. This confirmation strengthened my resolve. I contacted the county record's office and requested all documents related to my property. While waiting for these records, I began systematically documenting the current situation. Each day, I photographed the trail from various angles, captured images of people using it, and noted timestamps of heaviest traffic. The patterns were concerning. Between 7:00 and 9:00 a.m., the trail functioned essentially as a commuter path, with people cutting through to reach the bus stop on the main road. Midday brought dog walkers and parents with strollers. Evenings saw joggers and more dog walkers. I counted an average of 48 people crossing my property daily. The physical impact was evident. The once narrow footpath had widened to nearly 3 feet in places. Native plants were trampled. At the property edges, someone had cut back branches and shrubs to create clearer access. I photographed all of these modifications, creating a detailed record of alterations made without my knowledge or permission. When my county records arrived, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. The property lines were unambiguous. The trail sat entirely within my boundaries. There were no easements, no rights of way, no legal agreements of any kind granting public access. I hired a professional surveyor to mark the precise boundaries with official stakes. The surveyor arrived Thursday morning. As he worked, placing bright orange markers along my property line, neighbors emerged from their homes to watch. Some took photographs. Others engaged in whispered conversations while pointing toward my house. No one approached directly, but their disapproving glances communicated clear hostility. That evening, I discovered a neighborhood Facebook group that had existed for years. Though I could not join without approval, several posts were publicly visible. I was shocked to find recent discussions about the trail issue and the new homeowner trying to restrict community land. One post particularly disturbed me. We have always had access to that path. No single homeowner can suddenly claim exclusive rights to community spaces. But it was not a community space. It was my yard, my property, land I had purchased with my hard-earned money. I consulted a real estate attorney, bringing my growing file of documentation. After reviewing everything, she confirmed my position. You have absolute legal right to control access to your property. There is no established easement, no legal right of way. What exists is a case of permissive use that was granted by the previous owner permission that you are not obligated to continue. She recommended formal documentation of all trespassing incidents and suggested sending official letters to adjacent homeowners clarifying the property boundaries and my intention to restrict access. Document everything, she emphasized. Photographs, videos, dates, times. If this escalates, evidence will be crucial. I followed her advice meticulously. Each day, I added to my documentation photographs of unleashed dogs defecating on my property, timestamps of people crossing despite my verbal requests to stop, images of trampled garden beds and widened pathways, screenshots of social media posts referring to my land as community property. The final confirmation came when the surveyor's official report arrived, accompanied by a detailed map showing the property boundaries precisely staked. The report explicitly stated, "The footpath in question lies entirely within the boundaries of the subject property, with no recorded easements or public right-of-way." Armed with this documentation, I realized polite requests would not resolve this situation. The neighborhood had spent years establishing a sense of entitlement to my property. Clearer boundaries would be necessary, and I began researching my options for physically restricting access while complying with all local regulations. With my legal position confirmed, I installed simple private property signs at both trail entrances where it crossed my boundaries. The signs were modest but clear: private property, no public access. I placed them carefully on stakes at the surveyed property lines. The next morning, both signs were gone. In their place was another anonymous note: "Paths cannot be closed. Respect tradition." I replaced the signs, this time securing them more firmly and adding a small trail camera hidden in nearby trees. By evening, one sign had been vandalized with spray paint obscuring the word "private." The camera captured blurry footage of teenagers defacing the sign while an adult watched from a distance. I decided to approach the most frequent trail users directly. When an older gentleman with a golden retriever crossed my yard that afternoon, I walked out to speak with him. "Good afternoon. I am the new homeowner. I wanted to let you know that this trail is actually on private property and I will be restricting access soon." I kept my tone friendly and conversational. The man's expression hardened immediately. "Young man, people have walked this path for decades. You cannot just come in and change the rules." "Actually, legally I can. There is no easement or public right-of-way here." "Well, there should be. This is how people get to the park, how children walk to school. You would cut off important access just for your own privacy." His voice rose with indignation. "There are public sidewalks less than a block away," I pointed out. "That adds 15 minutes to the walk. This has always been open to the neighborhood." He whistled to his dog and stalked away, muttering about selfish newcomers. Similar conversations repeated with other trail users. A few seemed understanding, but most reacted with entitlement and anger. One woman declared, "The previous owner never had a problem with us walking here," as if Robert's permissive approach created a permanent obligation for all future owners. My attorney sent formal letters to adjacent homeowners, clearly stating the property boundaries and my legal rights to restrict access. The response was swift and hostile. 2 neighbors left voicemails demanding meetings. Another sent a lengthy email about community standards and neighborhood harmony. None acknowledged my legal rights. I researched fencing and gate options that would comply with HOA regulations. The neighborhood covenants allowed fencing with approval, requiring specific materials and heights. I carefully designed a solution: an attractive wooden gate with matching fence sections connecting to existing property markers. The installation would be professional, aesthetically pleasing, and unquestionably within my rights under HOA guidelines. After submitting the proper forms and receiving HOA approval, I scheduled installation for the following Tuesday. The contractor confirmed all permits were in order. Everything was legal, documented, and appropriately approved. Monday night, the evening before installation, I found a typed note pushed under my door. The message was no longer passive-aggressive but openly threatening. "If you block community access, consequences will follow. Reconsider your actions before it is too late." I photographed the note and added it to my documentation file. While unsettling, the threat only reinforced my determination. This was no longer just about privacy or property rights. It was about standing firm against intimidation and entitlement. That night, I noticed several neighbors congregated across the street, periodically glancing toward my house. When I stepped onto my porch, they dispersed quickly. The atmosphere felt charged with tension, as if the neighborhood held its collective breath waiting for tomorrow's confrontation. I double-checked my permits and approvals one final time, confirming everything was in order. Tomorrow would change the dynamic permanently. As I prepared for bed, I realized I had crossed a point of no return. By installing that gate, I would be labeled the neighborhood villain, all for the simple act of exercising my legal rights on my own property. Tuesday morning arrived with unusual quiet. The contractors pulled into my driveway at 8:00 a.m. sharp, 2 trucks loaded with materials for the gate installation. I greeted them with coffee and reviewed the plans one final time. The design was attractive, a natural cedar gate with decorative post caps, connected to short fence sections that would prevent easy circumvention. The workers began marking locations for post holes, measuring carefully to ensure everything aligned with my property boundaries. I provided them with the survey documents, emphasizing the importance of staying precisely within my property lines. The lead contractor nodded understanding. "Do not worry, sir. We deal with boundary installations all the time. Everything will be exactly where it should be." By mid-morning, concrete had been poured for the fence posts and the frame of the gate was taking shape. Neighbors began to emerge, standing at a distance, watching the work progress. Some took photos with their phones. Others made calls, speaking in hushed, urgent tones while glancing my way. No one approached directly, creating an atmosphere of silent surveillance. Around noon, a silver luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. The blonde woman I had encountered earlier, now mentally labeled as Karen, emerged, designer sunglasses pushed atop her head, face flushed with anger. She marched directly toward the workers, bypassing my front door entirely. "Stop this immediately," she demanded. "You cannot block a community access point." The contractors looked to me uncertainly. I stepped forward. "This is private property. The installation is fully permitted and approved by the HOA." Karen swiveled toward me, finger pointing accusingly. "Do you have any idea what you are doing? Families need this path. Children use it. Elderly neighbors depend on this shortcut." "There are public sidewalks less than a block away," I repeated calmly. "This is private property, not a public thoroughfare." "There is an easement here. This path has always been open." Her voice carried across the yard, clearly intended for the gathering audience of neighbors. "There is no easement," I corrected, maintaining an even tone. "I have all the property documents, surveys, and county records confirming this is private property with no public right-of-way." Karen's face reddened further. "Well, there should be. You cannot just move in and change decades of neighborhood tradition." She gestured wildly toward the partially constructed gate. "This is unacceptable. The HOA will hear about this." The HOA already approved the installation. I held up the approval form. Everything is properly documented and permitted. For a moment, Karen seemed flustered by this information. Then her expression hardened. "Fine, we will see about that." She pulled out her phone and began photographing the construction, the workers, and me. "The community will not stand for this selfish behavior. You will regret this decision." As she stalked back to her vehicle, I noticed my phone buzzing constantly. Notifications flooded the screen: Facebook, Nextdoor, community email groups. Someone had posted about the gate installation, characterizing it as the new homeowner destroying community access and privatizing paths that families have used for generations. Comments multiplied rapidly. most expressing outrage or disbelief without any understanding of the legal realities. The contractors continued working, though they now spoke in lowered voices, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. By late afternoon, the gate was fully installed, an attractive cedar structure with a simple latch and small, private property sign. The short fence sections connected seamlessly to the property boundaries, effectively blocking casual access while enhancing the aesthetics of the yard. I paid the contractors and thanked them for their professionalism despite the awkward circumstances. That evening, my phone rang continuously with numbers I did not recognize. I answered one call, only to be confronted by an angry stranger demanding explanation for blocking the neighborhood path. After that, I let them go to voicemail. The messages accumulated, some pleading, others threatening, all operating under the assumption that I had stolen something that rightfully belonged to the community. Wednesday morning brought more direct confrontations. As I left for work, 3 neighbors I had never met stood at the edge of my driveway. One stepped forward, introducing himself as a 20-year resident. "We need to discuss reopening the path," he began without preamble. "Perhaps you do not understand its importance to our community." I explained, yet again, the legal reality of private property boundaries. He listened impatiently before interrupting. "Laws aside, this is about being a good neighbor. You have disrupted an important community resource." "A resource that exists on private property," I emphasized. The conversation ended in frustrated stalemate. Thursday afternoon, I returned home to find Karen standing at my new gate, testing the latch. When she saw me approaching, she straightened defiantly. "This gate needs to come down," she declared. "I have easement rights here." "There is no easement," I corrected again. "This is private property. I have used this path for 15 years. That establishes right of way." "That is not how easements work legally," I explained. "The previous owner gave permission, which I have now revoked." Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You will remove this gate, or I will make sure it comes down another way." "Are you threatening to damage my property?" I asked quietly. "I am promising that authorities will force you to restore community access." She raised her phone. "I have already contacted the HOA board and local officials. They will not allow one selfish homeowner to disrupt established neighborhood patterns." As she marched away, her parting words hung in the air. "You have not heard the last of this, not by a long shot." I locked the new gate carefully behind me, suddenly grateful for the boundary it provided between my property and the entitled anger of strangers who believed my land belonged to them. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. I decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather to work in my garden, planting new shrubs along the fence line. For the first time since moving in, I enjoyed complete privacy in my backyard. No strangers walking past my windows, no dogs venturing onto my lawn. The gate had transformed the property into the peaceful sanctuary I had originally envisioned. I was kneeling in the soil, hands deep in mulch, when the sound of sirens pierced the quiet, police sirens growing steadily louder. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, assuming they were headed elsewhere. The sirens stopped abruptly. Car doors slammed. My stomach tightened as I realized the sounds came from directly in front of my house. I walked around to the front yard to find 3 police cruisers parked at my curb, lights flashing. 2 officers approached my front door while another stood by the vehicles, surveying the property. Neighbors emerged from surrounding homes, gathering at a distance to observe the unfolding scene. "Good morning, officers," I called, walking toward them with my hands visible. "Can I help you with something?" The lead officer, a stern-faced man with a salt and pepper mustache, turned toward me. Are you the homeowner? Yes, sir. I purchased this property 3 months ago. We received a 911 call reporting illegal obstruction of public access and threatening behavior at this address. His tone remained neutral, but his expression suggested he was assessing the situation carefully. Threatening behavior, I repeated, genuinely confused. There must be some mistake. The caller reported that you have illegally blocked a public access path and threatened residents who attempted to use it. He gestured toward my newly installed gate. I took a deep breath, fighting to remain calm. Officer, that gate is on my private property. I have all the documentation showing the property boundaries, proper permits, and HOA approval for the installation. Do you have that documentation available? He asked. Yes, absolutely. Everything is inside. Would you like to see it? He nodded, and I led the officers to my front door. As I reached for the handle, a familiar silver SUV screeched to a halt behind the police cruisers. Karen emerged, practically running toward us. Officers, that is him, she called, pointing dramatically. He has illegally blocked our community trail and threatened me when I tried to access it. The officers turned toward her approach. Ma'am, we are speaking with the homeowner now. Please wait by your vehicle. Karen ignored the instruction, continuing forward. He installed that gate to block a path that has been open to the community for decades. It is a public right-of-way. Ma'am, the officer repeated more firmly, we need you to step back while we gather information. I retrieved my property documentation and returned to the front porch, where more neighbors had gathered along the street. Some held phones, clearly recording the confrontation. Karen stood at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, watching intently as I spread the documents before the officers. Here is the property deed showing the boundaries. Here is the survey report confirming the trail falls entirely within my property lines. Here are the HOA approvals and permits for the gate installation. I pointed to each document methodically. There is no easement, no public right-of-way, no legal access requirement. This is private property. The officers reviewed the paperwork carefully. The lead officer radioed for confirmation of the permits, receiving verification within minutes. Karen paced impatiently at the edge of my property. These documents appear to be in order, the officer finally stated. The gate installation seems legal and properly permitted. Karen stormed forward again. That is impossible. That path has been open for 20 years. There must be an easement. Ma'am, property records do not show any easement or public right-of-way, the officer explained patiently. This appears to be a civil matter, not a criminal one. He threatened me, Karen insisted, voice rising. Yesterday, when I tried to use the path, he said he would make me regret it if I did not stay off his property. I stared at her in disbelief. That is completely false. I never said anything like that. Do you have any witnesses to this alleged threat? The officer asked her. Karen hesitated. No, we were alone, but he said it. He is trying to intimidate the neighborhood. The second officer, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward. Ma'am, did you call 911 for this complaint? Yes, he is blocking critical community access. 911 is for emergencies only, the officer explained. This is clearly a civil dispute over property boundaries. Misuse of emergency services can result in penalties. Karen's face flushed crimson. This is an emergency. Children cannot get to school. Elderly residents cannot reach the park. There are public sidewalks less than a block away, I interjected quietly. The lead officer turned back to me. Sir, Have you threatened anyone regarding this property dispute? Absolutely not. I have remained calm and factual throughout this entire situation, despite receiving threatening notes and confrontations from neighbors. You have received threats. The officer's eyebrows raised slightly. I nodded. Yes, I have documented everything. I retrieved the file containing photographs of the vandalized signs, copies of the threatening notes, and screenshots of hostile social media posts. I have exercised my legal rights to control access to my private property. In response, I have faced vandalism, harassment, and now false allegations. The officers reviewed this additional documentation, exchanging glances. The lead officer turned to Karen, who continued to fume at the edge of my lawn. Ma'am, based on the documentation provided, this homeowner appears to be within his legal rights. If you believe you have a valid easement claim, you should consult with an attorney and pursue this through proper civil channels. You are not going to make him remove the gate. Karen's voice rose in disbelief. We have no legal grounds to force removal of a properly permitted structure on private property. The officer's tone remained professional but firm. This is not a police matter. Karen's face contorted with anger. This is unacceptable. I want to speak to your supervisor. You are welcome to file a complaint at the station, the officer replied calmly. But I advise against making further 911 calls regarding this civil dispute. Karen stormed back to her vehicle, slamming the door as she got in. The gathered neighbors began to disperse, some looking disappointed that the confrontation had fizzled, others appearing thoughtful as they processed the information about property rights. The lead officer handed my documents back. Sir, I recommend keeping all this documentation readily available. If the dispute continues or escalates, do not hesitate to contact the non-emergency police line. I thanked them for their professionalism. As they returned to their vehicles, I noticed Karen still sitting in her SUV, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. This victory felt significant but temporary. The determined look on her face suggested the battle was far from over. Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the gate installation, a certified letter arrived from the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. The official envelope bore the community logo and urgent violation notice, stamped in red across the front. My stomach tightened as I opened it. The letter stated in formal language that my recently installed gate violates community aesthetic standards and impedes traditional neighborhood access patterns. It demanded removal within 10 business days or face escalating fines of $100 per day. The notice was signed by Margaret Williams, HOA board president. I immediately called my attorney, forwarding her a copy of the letter along with my original HOA approval documentation. This makes no sense, I explained. I received explicit written approval before installation. The gate matches neighborhood aesthetic guidelines precisely. Let me look into the HOA board membership, my attorney replied. Something does not add up here. Her research revealed what I had begun to suspect. Karen, whose real name was Catherine Bennett, served as vice president of the HOA board. She had apparently influenced the board to reverse their original approval despite having no legitimate grounds. Following my attorney's advice, I requested a formal hearing at the next HOA meeting, scheduled for the following Monday evening. The intervening days brought more anonymous notes, hostile glances from neighbors, and continued attempted trespassing. Twice, I caught people trying to climb over the fence sections adjacent to the gate. When confronted, they insisted they had always used this path, as if tradition negated private property law. Monday evening arrived with palpable tension. I gathered my documentation, property surveys, HOA approval forms, photographs of the gate demonstrating compliance with aesthetic guidelines, and legal statements regarding property rights. My attorney accompanied me, providing professional support that bolstered my confidence. The meeting room in the community center buzzed with whispered conversations as I entered. Nearly 60 residents filled the chairs, more than typically attended according to the sign-in sheet. Karen sat prominently beside the board president, wearing a tailored blazer and an expression of smug anticipation. She leaned over to whisper something to the president, both glancing my way. After preliminary agenda items, the president called my hearing. We will now address the gate installation violation at 1842 Oak Ridge Lane. I approached the podium, attorney beside me. The room fell silent. Good evening. I am here to address the violation notice regarding my gate installation. I placed my documents on the podium. I received proper HOA approval before installation. The gate complies with all aesthetic guidelines. Most importantly, it stands entirely on my private property, where I have legal right to control access. I methodically presented the documentation, including the original approval signed by 2 board members. As you can see, this installation was properly approved and permitted. The subsequent violation notice contradicts your own prior authorization. Karen interrupted, voice sharp. The approval was granted without full board review. The gate blocks a traditional community access point. My attorney stepped forward. Whether the board followed its own procedures for initial approval is an internal matter. More importantly, there is no easement or legal right-of-way across my client's property. The traditional access Ms. Bennett references has no legal standing. The board president looked uncomfortable. The concern is primarily aesthetic. The gate disrupts the open character of the neighborhood. I displayed photographs of 3 similar gates within the community. These existing structures share identical materials and design elements. My installation follows the precedent already established and approved within Oak Ridge Heights. As the evidence mounted, I noticed shifting expressions among board members. Some exchanged concerned glances. Others reviewed the documentation with furrowed brows. The president whispered to another board member, who nodded with apparent concern. Unexpectedly, an elderly gentleman in the back row stood. I would like to speak. The president acknowledged him, and he continued. I have lived in Oak Ridge Heights for 22 years. Last year, Ms. Bennett filed 3 violation complaints against my front garden gnomes, claiming they violated aesthetic standards. When I refused to remove them, she escalated to daily monitoring of my property. This seems to be a pattern. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Another resident raised her hand. We had a similar experience when Ms. Bennett objected to our permitted backyard playset. She claimed it was visible from her 3rd-floor window and ruined her view. Karen's face flushed crimson. This is not relevant to the current violation. Actually, my attorney interjected smoothly. A pattern of selective enforcement and personal vendettas is highly relevant to evaluating the legitimacy of this violation notice. The meeting devolved into multiple residents sharing their Karen stories, tales of nitpicky complaints, escalated violations, and neighborhood bullying. The board president struggled to maintain order as years of accumulated resentment surfaced publicly. After nearly an hour of testimony and evidence review, the board called a brief recess for deliberation. They returned looking solemn. Based on the documentation provided and the original approval granted, We find no violation regarding the gate installation at 1842 Oak Ridge Lane. The violation notice is rescinded. The president avoided looking at Karen, who sat rigid with barely contained fury. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached me quietly, offering support and sharing contact information. "We have put up with her behavior for too long," one whispered. "Maybe it is time we address the real problem in this neighborhood." I left the meeting with the violation dismissed, but acutely aware that Karen's humiliation would likely escalate her personal vendetta against me. The battle had shifted from gate removal to neighborhood politics, with lines being drawn and alliances forming. This victory felt meaningful but incomplete, the conflict far from resolved. Thursday morning brought another certified letter, this one from Bennett and Associates, attorneys at law. The formal legal letterhead and threatening language created an immediate knot in my stomach. The document demanded removal of my gate within 72 hours, claiming established community easement rights through historical use, and threatening immediate legal action for noncompliance. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, who called me within the hour. "This is a classic intimidation tactic," she explained. "They are hoping you will cave under pressure rather than face a lawsuit, regardless of legal merit." She recommended we prepare a comprehensive response, including a potential counterclaim for harassment and defamation based on Karen's false statements to police and the HOA board. "More importantly," she added, "I did some research into Bennett and Associates. The firm consists solely of Catherine Bennett's husband, Marcus Bennett. They specialize in corporate law, not property disputes. This appears to be another attempt at using perceived authority to bully you." While my attorney prepared our response, I received unexpected support from neighbors. 3 different residents contacted me, sharing documentation of similar threatening letters they had received from Bennett and Associates over minor disputes with Karen. None had resulted in actual lawsuits, just intimidation and eventual capitulation from frightened neighbors. Janet Miller, who lived 4 houses down, invited me for coffee on Saturday. "Catherine has been bullying this neighborhood for nearly a decade," she explained as we sat on her porch. "When we installed a basketball hoop for our children, she cited noise complaints daily. When the Rodriguez family painted their shutters navy blue instead of forest green, she pursued them through 3 HOA hearings. Most people eventually give in because fighting her is exhausting." Over the next week, I connected with 7 different homeowners who shared their Karen stories, patterns of intimidation, selective rule enforcement, and petty tyranny exercised through her HOA position. Together, we compiled a comprehensive history of her behavior, creating a neighborhood support network in the process. My attorney delivered our response to the Bennett letter, a meticulously documented refutation of their claims, accompanied by a clear warning that further harassment would result in legal counteraction. "Property boundaries and rights are unambiguous in this case," the letter concluded. "Any litigation would be frivolous and potentially subject to sanctions." 2 weeks passed without further legal threats. I began to hope the situation might be resolving itself. Then, returning home late Tuesday evening, my headlights swept across my front yard, briefly illuminating a figure at my gate. I recognized Karen's distinctive silhouette as she yanked repeatedly at the lock, then began kicking the gate posts with evident frustration. I parked at the curb, remaining in my vehicle, and called the non-emergency police line. "I am witnessing someone attempting to vandalize my property," I explained quietly. "I have security cameras recording, but I do not want to confront them directly." While waiting for police to arrive, I activated the gate camera through my phone app, capturing clear video of Karen's increasingly aggressive attacks on the structure.